Do you ever watch live gig videos of other violinists and wish that you could peel back the curtain and see what's making them tick? I can't speak for anyone else, but I'm sharing all of my secrets today. They're not really secrets, but no one ever told me what I needed to get. I just figured it out little by little, year after year. But today, I'm going to save you the 20 years and lay it all out in the next few minutes. Are you a classically trained violinist dreaming of stepping out of the orchestra and into the spotlight, but maybe the world of solo gigs feels intimidating? You're not alone. Welcome to the Glam Violinist, the podcast that empowers classically trained musicians to build thriving careers as sought-after entertainers. I'm your host, Celeste V, and each week we'll break down the secrets to getting the gigs you've been dreaming of. Get ready to unleash your inner rock star and turn your passion into a paycheck. Let's get glamorous. Today's episode is about what you need to buy to get started. I am not a gearhead. Far from it. I tend to buy the bare necessities and just make it work. I don't personally get excited about pedal boards and all the latest gadgets, but I have friends who do, and believe me, they will be featured heavily in future episodes of this podcast. There's so much to know out there, and there's so many directions you can go with this, but for now, I'm just going to share what I know and what works for me. I'm going to lay out a very basic foundation of what you need to get started. If you do find yourself going down that rabbit hole of cool gear and effects and things, you should definitely check out my friend Rob Flax and his YouTube channel where he hosts Fuzz Fiddle with Flax, all about cool gear and effects for the violin. So let's get back to the basics. For a typical glam violin gig, you're going to need a violin, a wireless system, a laptop for backing tracks, a speaker, and some cables and accessories. Most of you probably already have and play an acoustic violin. So an acoustic instrument is great for several different scenarios. One example is super intimate gigs where amplification would just be overkill, such as a surprise marriage proposal in the park, maybe a really small, very intimate wedding ceremony, or especially for ceremonies that are in churches or buildings that have really great acoustics already built in. You don't really need to amplify your violin in these scenarios because just the violin itself already has built-in sound, and you won't require power in order to play for these. Another scenario where an acoustic violin would fit better is if it's more the vibe that the client is going for. It's a kind of a visual element more so than a sound element in this case. Sometimes also the client will specifically request a traditional violin or a wooden violin. In those cases, you want to try to honor their request unless that is just not a part of your brand, and then you can just tell them that's not what I do. On the opposite end of that spectrum, some violinists just prefer an acoustic for all their performances because it is a part of their brand or their sound. Still, for most glam gigs, you're going to need some type of amplification, even if you're playing an acoustic. Now, there are two different directions you can go with this. You can either use a mic or a pickup. There are lots of pros and cons to each I won't get into today, and there are many brands out there. Keep in mind, if you're going glam, you're going to want to be wireless so you can move around and entertain. So if you decide to go with a mic, you're going to want the clip-on variety, not the one that sits on a stand. Pickups will also be attached in some way, but you should know that some are detachable, like you can take them off before and after every performance, while others are built into the bridge or installed in a more permanent way, and that's really helpful if you plan to use it a lot. The price range is roughly $100 to $500 for a pickup or for a mic, so you need to choose the one that works best for you, and so that you have the option to amplify your acoustic violin if you need to. Then, of course, there are electric violins. I can't begin to name all the options here. I'm not even going to try. If you're on a budget, you should definitely consider buying a used instrument. There are plenty of them out there, but they run the gamut as far as price. You can go all the way up to full custom. You can spend thousands and thousands of dollars on an electric violin. It's really up to you. We'll talk about this more later, but if you're interested in learning more about this, the Electric Violin Shop has some great resources for choosing a violin that fits your budget and your vibe. That's all I'm going to say about this for now, but you can definitely expect to hear more on this topic later, especially with some of my guests on the show. Just in case you're wondering, you're going to use a traditional horsehair bow for your electric violin. It's the same exact kind that you use for your acoustic. There's no difference at all. So besides your violin, you're going to need a wireless system and a few other things. Now, the wireless system comes in a few shapes and sizes. The brands that I've always used are Shure or sometimes Sennheiser. Line 6 also has some good ones. What you don't want to do is use the cheapest one that you can find, because it's not going to have the quality that you want for most gigs. It's also not going to have the reach, and it's going to experience a lot more interference when you're at a larger event where other people are using wireless. So it's really important to buy the most expensive wireless system you can possibly afford, especially if you plan on doing really large scale events. It really does make a difference when you get into that situation where you've got videographers, photographers, DJs, everybody's using wireless systems of some kind, and that can get into a lot of interference. So the more expensive and the more high-end the wireless system you buy, the better signal you're going to get from that in that particular situation. If you're playing more intimate events or smaller scenarios, you can get away with a much cheaper wireless system. So just think about that as you're planning and how you're marketing yourself. So the wireless system is going to have two different components. It's going to have a receiver and a transmitter. The receiver plugs into your violin, into the pickup, or it plugs into the mic that's attached to your violin. The receiver can either get attached to yourself, you can put it on your belt, you can attach it to your clothing. I like to put mine on the inside of my shoulder rest, but you can put it anywhere you want. It's usually a short cable, maybe 3 feet at the most. That receiver sends a signal to the transmitter. The transmitter is a larger box, and that's plugged into a mixer or a speaker, depending on how you're going into the sound. The other option you can do is have the transmitter plug into a reverb pedal before it goes into the mixer. But if you do decide to add any effects or pedals, that's where they go in the signal flow, is after the transmitter and before the mixer. Now let's talk a little bit about signal flows. I just used that word. You're probably like, what is that? There's so many different types of cables, and it can be really overwhelming at first. Here are some of the cables that you're going to use frequently on a Glam violin gig. The first one is called a mic cable. That's an XLR, and it is usually male to female. This is a balanced cable, so you want to use that whenever possible because it's going to have the highest quality sound. Then there's an instrument cable, also called a 1/4-inch cable. That is usually male to male, most commonly. That's what you're going to use the most. I won't even bother with the others. And that cable is unbalanced, so you're not going to get as high quality of sound, but it's still great if that's what you need to use. Then there's an auxiliary cable. Auxiliary cable has a lot of different names. It's also called an aux cable, a headphone cable, an 1/8-inch cable, or a 3.5 millimeter cable. That is usually male to male, but it can be male to female or others. An RCA cable is the one that's got the red and white end or a red and black end. That's specifically a dual RCA audio cable. You may or may not use that one. I'll explain why you would use it in just a minute. There are also lots of other converters or adapters where you can turn, for example, a male 1/4-inch into a male XLR or whatever. You can also buy cables that have different types of ends. So one cable that I use all the time is male 1/4-inch to male XLR and male 1/4-inch to female XLR. I'm going to explain that when I get into my signal flow. So here's the signal flow I use for my violin. It goes from the violin, which has a 1/4-inch output on it that is connected to my transmitter. That transmitter sends a signal to the receiver for my wireless. And then in the back of the receiver, I plug in an XLR cable, and that's a female XLR. At the other end of that female XLR cable is a 1/4-inch, a male 1/4-inch. That male 1/4-inch goes into my reverb pedal. And then on the other side of the reverb pedal, another 1/4 inch comes out. At the end of that 1/4 inch cable is a male XLR. That male XLR goes into the mixer or straight into the speaker. I know that was a lot. It will be easier if you see it in writing, but I just wanted you to know this is what I use for every single gig that I do. I would say 99% of the time. All right, so now we have the violin going all the way through its signal flow into the mixer or the speaker, but we still have to connect another channel for the laptop. Some people do use an iPad or an iPhone to play their backing tracks, but as I explained in a previous episode, I prefer to use a laptop because all of my tracks are custom made and they are on my laptop on the hard drive. And so that's how I play my tracks. So if you're using a certain type of speaker, you might still be able to connect that via Bluetooth, but you're going to want to have a headphone jack on your laptop because most of the time when you're plugging into a mixer, you're going to need that headphone jack with some type of cable that connects it to the mixer. When I perform, I'm usually playing with a DJ or with their speaker at the very least. They're the ones setting up the speaker and they're setting up a mixer for me when I'm performing. So I keep with me 4 different types of cables. I take an auxiliary cable, which I mentioned before, and that's a male aux to male aux. That's your headphone, your typical headphone cable that goes from the laptop into the mixer if they have that type of input. I also carry an auxiliary to XLR. XLR, as I explained, is a mic cable. This is the one I use the most. I like to use that aux from the headphone jack of the laptop into the XLR channel on the mixer. I also bring with me an aux to 1/4 inch. That's a male 1/4 inch, of course. And that is going to do the same exact thing as XLR. It's just not a balanced cable, so the audio quality is a tiny bit less. The other option is aux to RCA. And that is the red and black or the red and white cable at the end. It's got 2 little connectors at the end. And that one is great for some scenarios. I like to try different cables out and see which one sounds the best, but I like to have all 4 of these options so that I have a backup and different ways to connect to the mixer, regardless of the type of mixer they give me. I have 3 different types of speakers that I can take with me to a gig if the DJ or the AV team at the venue or that the client hired is not providing sound. The smallest one I've ever used for a gig is a little tiny JBL Charge, and I would only use this, for example, for a small proposal in the park when I'm using my acoustic violin, or for a little tiny intimate ceremony where just the acoustic violin is enough and my little JBL Charge connects to my laptop Bluetooth and I can play tracks from that. Usually those are really simple tracks like piano tracks or guitar tracks, something acoustic, very low key. It's just something to kind of fill in the sound underneath the violin. Don't really recommend that for gigs except in very specific scenarios. The one I use the most probably, and what I recommend to a lot of my violinists, is the Bose S1 Pro. That is a very beautiful, compact, but very, very loud speaker. I do recommend having a stand to go with that. So you're going to want to buy both a speaker and a speaker stand. It looks like it's kind of overkill for that little bitty speaker, but honestly, if you put that speaker 6 feet overhead, it is going to project so much further and you can cover a lot more space than if you just have it sitting on the ground or even on a table. So the Bose S1 Pro is my go-to speaker for most events if the DJ is not providing sound. Now, I also have much more robust speakers, a pair of Bose L1 Compacts that I absolutely love. I used to use them quite a lot before I started playing at larger events where the DJ or the AV team was providing sound. I could set these up on either side of my laptop and point them in different directions and fill an entire venue without a problem. So that's if you really want to go up to the next level, but there are so many other speakers in that same category. I'm not saying they're the best. I'm just saying that's what I have and that's what I use. Well, now that you've got all the big stuff, there are lots of accessories and cables and other things that you might need. There are different options for different scenarios. It's really hard to encompass every potential situation, But you're definitely going to need cases, and I would recommend high quality cases to store your gear so it stays protected. You're going to need bags and things like that you can figure out how you can carry everything at once so you don't have to make multiple trips to your car or to the subway or however you are getting to the gig. I love my rock and roller cart. You can find them in various sizes and price points on Amazon or anywhere else. It's been a lifesaver for me back when I was carting speakers around all over the place. You can also get a small folding table or even a stand that collapses down to set your laptop on. I usually just ask the client or the venue to provide a table, but I used to carry a table with me to every gig, and you may find that easier. You're going to want straps for keeping your cables organized. You're going to need a stand for your iPad if you're using sheet music. And I always recommend taking a collapsible stand for your phone camera to every single gig so you can set that up somewhere and at least get one video. Videos are priceless, and it is how you're going to get more gigs. I cannot emphasize this enough. We're going to have lots and lots and lots of episodes on this in the future, but make sure you grab a good collapsible stand for your phone. And that's it. Everything you need to do a basic Glam violin gig. That includes an electric violin or an amplified acoustic, a good wireless system, a laptop for backing tracks, and a speaker. With that, you're ready to start gigging. Please subscribe to this podcast and follow me on Instagram at TheCelesteV. That's TheCelesteVEE. And while you're there, send me a DM with any questions you have and topics that you want to hear more about on future episodes of The Glam Violinist. I hope you enjoyed this episode about gear and equipment. And if you did, please will you share it with other musicians who might be interested in this type of gigging? Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Glam Violinist. I am so excited you're here, and I can't wait to watch you grow, no matter where you are on your journey. We are in this together, and I believe in you. Until next time, this is Celeste V reminding you to stay glamorous.